Greetings and welcome to another edition of Montpelier Connection. I'm State Representative Mike Mrowikci from the Windham 4 District of Putney, Dummerston, and Westminster, and I'm joined here today by my district mate, the Dean of the House, David Deen, and by Senator Jeanette White. Today we're here to wrap up the 2014 session and look at what we've done, what we wish we could have done, and looking ahead yet what we could do next year. David, you're the chair of the Wet and Wild Committee. Fish, wildlife, water resources. You had a busy year. You did some good work.
After 8 years of trying, we finally got a shoreland protection bill passed, both bodies, and I believe it's on its way to the governor. We have not heard whether he's going to sign it or not. I presume he will. And it, for the first time, offers protection for that nearshore area of native undisturbed vegetation at the shoreland of a lake. It offers habitat enhancement. It offers protection against runoff and pollution and nutrient loading, which are some of the major problems facing our lakes. Vermont is a little slow to the dance. New Hampshire has had this law in place since 1992, and Maine has had it in place since the 1970s. And actually owning a camp on a lake in New Hampshire for 15 years, I have lived comfortably with the law, and I believe that Vermonters are going to find this an easy law to comply with if they keep their eye on the ball in terms of protecting water quality in our lakes.
Yeah, there was a lot of concern last summer about this bill. What were some of the issues that came up about this bill?
Well, they were phrased in various ways, and I don't mean to be overly cynical, but basically people were saying you can do anything you want to protect the lakes of Vermont, not on my property. And we, in fact, by continuing to work with people, 7 public meetings around the state, education of the importance of this provision in law, we were able to move it through the Senate this year. It had passed the House last year in a form that people found very comfortable in terms of what the final product looked like. It was not in a unanimous vote in either body, but very strong votes on the final vote to pass the bill.
Yeah, I think this is the kind of legislation that will help us get a cleaner future for us and for generations to come. And right alongside that, though, there's another water quality bill that's still up in the air, right?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the protections that we got this session were for lakes. And this year, the House passed, but the Senate did not have time to take up, and that's a legitimate claim on their part, because it took so long to get through the House, was to offer the same protections to rivers. Rivers feed our lakes. A lot of the problems, particularly in Lake Champlain, but even other inland lakes in the state, come down the rivers to the lake. And consequently, we need to reach up into those tributary rivers in order to address agricultural runoff, municipal runoff, logging runoff, and other land use activities that sort of feed the toxins and the nutrients that are loading our lakes and causing these algae blooms that we're seeing all over the North Country. So we'll come back to that. We, as I said, got to pass the House, and we'll work on it with the Senate again next year.
This year you had shared with me a little bit of news that was shocking to me, actually, about the runoff that goes down to the mouth of the Connecticut, that there's actually now sort of a dead zone at the...
There's a dead zone in Long Island Sound, correct. And the Connecticut River is part of the cleanup plan for Long Island Sound. Right now Connecticut, New York are signatories to that cleanup plan. It is reaching up the river, and eventually, as with Lake Champlain, we have a cleanup plan there for phosphorus nutrient loading. We will have a cleanup plan for the Connecticut River for nitrogen loading. The same techniques will protect both watersheds in terms of agriculture, municipal logging, and other runoff from stormwater runoff from land use activities. So what works in the Lake Champlain watershed will work in Lake Memphremagog, which also has a cleanup plan, and the Connecticut River. The big impetus, and I'll just say it now because you might ask the question later, for my running again, is that the state of Vermont is under the gun with the Environmental Protection Agency, the federal agency responsible for the Clean Water Act. And we will have to take action next year. That Rivers bill that I talked about was mostly aimed at that cleanup plan that EPA is requiring of us. And I think it's going to be, with having a big buddy with a big stick standing over us, I think it's going to be a year when we can see some real motion in terms of cleaning up the rivers. And I certainly want to be there for that.
Now you mentioned, I think you mentioned that in the Connecticut River, nitrogen is the problem, whereas I think in Lake Champlain,
And
it's
in Memphremagog, it's phosphorus.
phosphorus.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
What are the conditions that make that different?
All watersheds have what's known as a limiting nutrient, meaning that the natural soils have a shortage of something. In the case of the watershed, the Lake Champlain watershed, the limiting nutrient is phosphorus. And when you feed phosphorus into a situation like that, poof, the plant growth gets very active, including blue-green algae and the toxic problems that we've had with cyanobacteria. In the Connecticut watershed, the limiting nutrient is nitrogen because it's going into a salt water, it's part of a salt water watershed. The limiting nutrient is nitrogen, so as you feed nitrogen into it, poof, the plant life explodes. And you mentioned the dead spot. One of the things that excessive plant growth causes, when it dies, it rots, and it takes oxygen out of the water column in order to complete that process. And when you have too much plant activity, you have a base that just pulls oxygen out of the water, and you get an anoxic situation, which means there's no oxygen or too little oxygen in the water. So that's what we're facing in Long Island Sound.
Yeah. Now, among the bills that your committee worked on, though, there was another one that was I think, very important in terms of public safety, especially for children, the toxics bill in
Yeah, the bill was designed to protect children from chemicals that could cause them harm. We have been waiting since the 1980s for the federal government to take some action in order to protect the citizens of the country and of Vermont. Well, they haven't done it. And over the last decade, the situation has gotten even worse since that the major legislative initiative that is being considered right now would take away all authority from the states who put something in place after the passage of that act. So not only did we have federal inaction, but they were about to take away the state's prerogatives to protect our children and citizens. And the Senate and House did some heavy lifting, did some good work. We disagreed initially, but we came to a place where we have a bill in place that lists 66 chemicals that have been fully vetted and tested by the state of Washington, that will make a list here in the state of Vermont where people can, if they buy a product, go and look in terms of what the components and chemicals that are used in that product are. Manufacturers have until 2016 in order to register their products and chemicals. And so we're giving business some time in order to be able to comply, but we're started on the road to having a listing so that we know what chemicals we are being exposed to. The list can be added to. There's a provision in the statute that as other chemicals become known to be of potential harm to children, they can be added to the list. And the worst of the worst can be banned. Our Commissioner of Health, through a rulemaking procedure, can ban products from being sold in the state of Vermont. So we think it's a good start. Eventually, we will bring it, I hope, to a full consumer product legislation. Right now, it's aimed at children under 12 years of age and products that are marketed specifically to children under 12 or children under 12 are likely to be exposed, i.e. a kid crawling on a rug. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, that kind of chemical can be listed so that citizens of Vermont have full warning. So it was a good piece of work by both bodies in order to bring this to fruition.
I think on the Senate side, Senator Lyons had done a lot of work to move this. Is that right?
And the Natural Resources Committee, Senator Ayer, I don't know who else is on that committee, but they.
She's Health and Welfare.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and and then Commerce and Economic Development was also involved on the Senate side. On our side, Fish, Wildlife, and Water Resources had the lead, but Commerce, Ways and Means, Appropriation, Human Services were all part of the discussion. I walked the bill through all of those committees, although there was not actual possession of the bill, in particular in your committee.
And you did a lot of good work on the floor with that bill. And the shoreline bill, I know that there was a lot of questioning on the floor around these issues, and
Yeah, I think it was a 4-hour debate,
yeah.
which is a long time.
it is. It's a long time, and I think you held firm, answered all the questions, and it's really democracy at work. But good work to get that through.
Thank you.
Yeah. Senator White,
Hello.
my fellow Putneyite.
Yeah.
Are you recovered yet from the rigors of especially those last 2 weeks of the session?
Yeah, I'm not, I still require a lot of sleep,
Yeah.
but
We had a lot of late nights those last couple of weeks.
you had
to
more
get
than
done.
we did because there are 150 of you that all have to say something. There's only 30 of us that have to each say something, so you had a lot. You had more late nights
Yeah.
than we did.
Yeah. So you have two committees. You chair Government Operations,
I do.
and you're on House Judiciary.
No, Senate Judiciary.
Senate Judiciary.
That's okay. We haven't gotten that far yet, that we can put senators on House committees.
To start off with, one of the things you did in Government Operations had to do with elections, and we had to do something, or else there was a concern that the federal government, was going to step in and force us to do something in terms of our election primary dates.
The primary date, yeah. Nobody wants a primary date everybody would love to have the primary date in September.
Yeah.
And that's where we all wanted it. Last year, we changed it to, the Senate changed it to kept it at where it is now, the fourth week in August. And the House changed it to the first week in August. And in the end, the compromise from the conference committee was the second week in August. And we heard pretty compelling arguments from the Department of Justice, the Federal Department of Justice, and the overseas voters, I can't remember what the acronym is now, but it's the Overseas Voters Commission, and
Especially our service people
well,
overseas.
no, this is anybody overseas.
I understand that, but-
They don't differentiate.
Yeah.
There has to be 45 days. You have to send out the ballots 45 days ahead of
Yeah.
the election. And the problem in Vermont is that we have had 2 challenges, recounts in the last 2 elections, and it takes a lot of time to do those recounts. And even by tightening up the number of days, a challenger will now have less time to ask for a recount. The recount has to be set within a certain number of days. It has to be finished within a certain number of days. Even by tightening all that up,
Yeah.
we couldn't guarantee that they would go out. And part of the problem is that we have 246 different entities that prepare the ballots
Yep.
and that send them out. If it was all done through the Secretary of State's office, and we had one election overseer, it wouldn't be as much of a problem, but each of our town clerks is the overseer of the elections in their towns. So the federal government told us, we've been sued twice, and part of the settlement of the suit was that they wouldn't sue us again if we did something about it. So we didn't change it for this year because that would have been
Yeah.
a little too soon to make that change for this year. But for the 2016 election, it will be the second Tuesday in August. And remember, a lot of people are on vacation, and what we heard is nobody's gonna show up. First of all, primaries are party functions. They're for the parties to figure out who their candidates are going
Yeah.
to be. So the parties have to get their people out
Yeah.
to vote. And and you have 45 days before, as soon as those ballots are available, you can go into your town clerk's office and vote. Or
Yep.
you can ask for
That's right.
a ballot to be sent to you. So it doesn't mean that everybody on the second Tuesday in August has to be in town
Yeah.
and go vote.
Yeah.
So we didn't want to do that, but I think we had no choice.
Yeah. Well, Jeanette, that's, I think, a good example of the nuts and bolts kinds of things we do in the legislature, which is really the great majority of the work we do that doesn't get the headlines,
Yeah.
but is really the necessary work of government to make sure that things are working as they should and that the systems are in order to ensure our democracy works as it should.
I think so.
Government operations has a pretty big agenda every year. It's not as big as last session when you did redistricting, but what are some of the other things GovOps was looking at?
Well, we looked at the kind of overall elections bill. We finally have a campaign finance bill in place that we did last year and then signed off on the conference committee in January. So we have that in place. The new limits won't go into place until 2014. I'm going actually to try and write something because I think that there's a lot of details in there that are hard to talk about. They get a little bit mundane when you try to talk about them, but we do have a campaign finance bill that I think increases the transparency
Yeah.
and the reporting requirements. There are more
Yeah.
reporting requirements.
Now, will that be done online?
Yes, starting in, by 2015, it
Yeah.
has to be. The
Okay.
Secretary of State has to have it in place. But he believes that he'll have something in place at some point in this election
good.
cycle. So we'll be able to do that. And it'll be a searchable database too, so that you can go in and you can find out everybody that Pepsi-Cola gave money to.
Yeah.
Or you can find out how many contributions above $200 I accepted. It'll be searchable in many, many different
Yeah,
ways,
good.
which is something that people have been asking for a long time. We one of the things that we did this year that took a lot of time and effort was what's called the TASER bill. We set guidelines for the use of tasers by police forces, and that was a very emotional issue. We had people in there one person whose husband had been killed and she felt that had the police officer been able to use a taser, he would not have been killed because he was killed with a gun. And another person whose son was killed by a taser.
Yeah.
So trying to put these together and the disparate opinions of the ACLU and law enforcement and the disability rights community. But I think we have a really good bill, and in the end, everybody agreed with it. And it's the standard for deployment is less than you would use with lethal force, but above, when it came from the House, it was active resistance. And what we learned is this can be active resistance, and that's not a high enough standard. So the standard now is, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's aggressively resisting or threatening the life of someone else. So,
Now, you mentioned that Disability Rights Vermont was part of this discussion. Was that because the person who died was supposedly mentally ill, and there were concerns that this was a factor in the...
yeah, partially, and also because one of the things that we heard, and we had a young man come in who's autistic, and he said, you know, he might, it might seem like he's resisting, but he's not really resisting. He has issues with space, and if you come at him or if you touch him, he's going to resist in a way that if you don't have the training, you might...
Or he'll react.
Right, and so the bill also requires special training for whoever is going to be certified to use a taser. Actually, they're not called, taser is a brand name. Yeah. I didn't know that until this year, but they're called electronic something devices. And so anybody who's going to be certified to use one has to have special training in mental health issues and people with disabilities whose disability may affect their ability to communicate or understand directions. And old people like me, you're not... pregnant women, where there are all kinds of training requirements that are going to be that are in the bill. And I think it's a good bill, and everybody seemed happy with it in the end.
Well, thank you for your work on that.
It was hard.
Yeah,
But
you did a lot of work on the Senate Judiciary Committee as well.
Yep.
Now, Governor Shumlin started this session referencing what we all know to be the reality of the problems of drug addiction, drug use, and the associated crime that goes with that, both legal prescription drug abuse and illegal drug use. One of the things that there was a collaboration about, based on some of the governor's plans between the House and Senate, Judiciary, Health and Welfare, Human Services, was what we call the early intercept models, where the idea is to get treatment for people as soon as possible. And the research shows that when someone gets arrested, as they say, when the blue lights are on, they're most inspired to be talked into getting into treatment. Can you share a little bit about how Senate Judiciary looked at that and where we got to, along with the work that Bobby Sands did in helping move that?
Well, what we did is looked at what we called the pretrial risk assessment program. And the idea is that when somebody is arrested, that is as you said, the blue light moment. And if you can do a risk assessment for their risk of flight, whether they should be given bail, and then do a screening on them, if we can find out that really treatment of some sort is going to be more effective both for them and to the cost of the system, it makes sense to do that. So for what we've done is we've put in place a pre-trial risk assessment and screening program that can be used on anybody except people who are convicted of what are called the listed crimes. And those are the big ones: murder, sexual assault, kidnapping of a child. There's, I think, about 14 or 15 what are called listed crimes. and they aren't eligible for it. So that, and each county puts this in place. The state's attorney will be working on putting this in place with their diversion program and their community justice programs and all the resources that they have available to them. And I think there are a lot of other things that went along with that, like requiring doctors to make better use of the prescription monitoring program so that you can find out if people are drug shopping or doctor shopping for drugs. And you can find out what prescribing habits there might be for practitioners. The precious metal dealer bill, which sounds it sounds like nothing, but in fact, what we found is that there were a ton of robberies, and they were stealing precious metals, and then
You mean like copper?
copper, gold, silver, all of those, and you have these not so upstanding dealers that come in and buy them, and it's stolen property, and they don't assess it, and so we've tightened up what precious metal dealers have to, the licensing and the requirements for them to operate. We increased the penalty for trafficking of illegal drugs. And that would include the trafficking of illegal prescription drugs. I mean,
Right.
it isn't just. And increase the penalty for home invasions with a weapon involved. So there were a lot of parts to the bill, and Judiciary worked really hard on. There were a couple big bills that we worked really hard on, and that was one of them. And I think that we'll see what happens. We'll see if it makes a difference or not.
The governor did, I think, an admirable job articulating the problem we have and getting out in front of it. I think that there's some serious issues here in Vermont. I don't think things are as bad as they are in other places, but it's a complicated situation. And this bill, I think, really looked at as many of the facets of this that we can address, and I think we did good work collectively.
I think so. I think that it went through Judiciary in the Senate, and then Health and Welfare didn't actually take the bill, but they looked at the bill and did what we call a drive-by. They took testimony on it and had their comments and input into it, and then it went over to the House, and I think the same thing happened over there with Judiciary and Human Services.
That's right.
So
It was a good partnership.
I think it was.
It was a good example of the collaboration between the
Right.
two bodies, between different committees, and I think a collaboration of leadership to make sure this happened between the Senate Pro Tem, House Speaker, the Governor's office. It was an important bill, and I think we did some good work on it. Now the next step is to put this in place.
Right, and I think that having the administration behind this and devoting a person in the form of Bobby Sand
Yes.
to take this on and kind of shepherd it through and try to make sure that we were addressing things and things weren't falling through and that there was the collaboration. I think that was very helpful.
I think it's another example, from my perspective, having now served under two administrations, on how much different it is working in concert with the governor than working at odds with the governor. I think we were all on the same page with this. There's times where we disagree, but basically we were, especially on this issue, we were really looking to get something done and for the betterment of all Vermonters.
And I think that this was not, as a lot of the issues that Judiciary dealt with this year were not partisan issues at all. There was no partisan bickering about the opiate, about the collateral consequences bill that we passed, about the GMO bill. I mean, I think that they were none.
Well, you mentioned those three letters, which we have talked about a lot, and we did get that GMO bill passed.
We did.
There was a lot of heavy lifting done on both sides again. We passed our bill in the House, sent it over to the Senate. We came to a place where I think we've taken, again, little old Vermont has taken a leadership role in this country. Can you tell us a little bit about what the bill hopefully will do and how you got there?
Well, my role was not on the Ag Committee, and they looked at the issue of genetically modified organisms from the perspective of were they good or bad, or looked at that, and what would it do to the agricultural community. Judiciary looked at it in the sense of, is this a legally defensible bill?
Yeah.
And we think it is. What it would do is it would require anything sold in Vermont to state whether it's GE free, produced with GE, or we don't know.
Yeah.
And some people may not be able to tell because they can't source all of their products.
Yeah. So we're not saying it's good or bad.
no, this
We're
doesn't
just
say-
saying, here's the information for you to make your own
Right,
choice.
right. This doesn't say whether it's good or bad. And there are, I think there's 60 countries in the world that already do this.
That's right.
And I mean, we know that General Mills probably sells in Switzerland, right?
Yeah.
So they already have labels in
Well,
Switzerland.
they already have
And
there's this-
so
they have a cereal out now, the
Cheerios.
Cheerios.
Well, Cheerios have always been, and they can claim they always have been
Yeah.
because there really aren't a lot of genetically modified oats.
Yeah.
Where cornflakes are probably not going to
Yeah.
have that label on them.
Yeah.
And it doesn't require a separate label for
Yeah.
Vermont. It could be the same label that's
Yeah.
used anywhere else. The difference with our bill with other states' bills is that there's no trigger.
Yeah.
Connecticut
I mean,
has.
we don't have to wait for other states to join in.
There's no trigger at all. It doesn't say other states or the federal government, or it has to be proved or anything. There's no trigger. It goes into effect in, I think, 2015. And is that when it is? I think it's 2015. And which gives time then to implement it and for manufacturers to look at producers to look at their labeling. And Connecticut says unless a contiguous state of 20 million or whatever it is passes, which is New York, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and Maine says that unless 5 contiguous states pass the same legislation, it won't go into effect. I don't think Maine has 5 contiguous states, does it? I mean, unless they're
Well,
looking
unless you're
at.
counting the provinces up in
Well,
Canada.
or they're probably counting Maine and then New Hampshire and then Vermont and then
Yeah.
contiguous to each other, but it's very weirdly worded. But anyway, so ours has no trigger, it just goes into effect.
Yeah.
And we set up a fund
Yeah.
to implement it, which I know you said you thought was a great idea.
I do. Crowdsourcing our defense fund.
I actually voted against putting that in there. But in the end, I voted for it because I thought the way we did it was, it's an implementation fund, not a defense fund. Because my concern was that if we say we will pass things if we have a defense fund set up for them, then we could very easily then get to the point where we'll only pass things that might benefit wealthy people because they can set up the defense fund. And I think that's wrong. If we believe that something is right,
Yep.
we should do it.
Well, that's a good point. I think in this case, though, it is a national issue. And I think we're going to be,
We're gonna be sued.
the big guns are coming after
Oh,
little old Vermont.
and they've already filed a suit.
And,
I
and
understand.
I wasn't there when you went through the BGH, was it?
Yeah.
But I think we're in for it again, and I think this may help us. Well, when we started way back in January, we were still digging our way out of the Great Recession that Governor Shumlin inherited, really, and I have to give him credit that I think he set us on the road. As a businessman, I think he's had as much to do with helping dig us out, and he's used his business acumen to get us going. We've been on the road to a more sustainable economy and a sustainable energy system. We've created a lot of jobs along with having one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. And I think a lot of our jobs are green jobs. The governor saw that we had an unsustainable healthcare system, and we're on the road to that. Both of you have been at this for a long time, and both have been supporting single-payer healthcare. Any thoughts as we move forward? David, you've been around as long as anybody and seen the different iterations of this over the years. Where do you think it's going, and what are your hopes for that?
Well, in my experience going all the way back into the 90s, we are closer than we've ever been. Nobody ever thought that this was going to be easy. No one ever thought that there weren't going to be costs associated with it. Most industrialized nations in the world have a health system that guarantees health coverage for their citizens, and they are all paying for it. It's not pixie dust or magic or whatever other epithets are being thrown at those of us who want this to move forward. But because it is difficult, because it is demanding, and I suspect that we will only get one shot at doing this, and so we have to get it right. It's taking a little bit longer than everybody had hoped. But I'm willing to keep working toward the eventual goal. So we're closer than we've ever been, and the Affordable Care Act at the federal level has helped in terms of organizing a method of being able to aggregate people in terms of insurance plans, a variety of plans right now. So we're making progress towards the eventual goal. So I'm not even frustrated. I just knew it was going to take a long time.
I think that we need to, what David said is that it is going to take a long time. And we did, there was a bill that came out of the Senate Finance and it went to the House, and it ultimately never passed. But, and it had some things in there that I found were a little unrealistic. For example, one of the things was, well, let me step back. Some people thought that by us doing this, we were saying we don't have faith that the governor is going to go forward and do this. And that was not, and so they started referring to it as an alternate plan or a plan B. And that wasn't the idea at all. The idea was that when we get there, we're going to have to be ready to make some legislative changes. And we have to do some groundwork before that, because if the administration comes in with a financing plan, we have to have done some work ahead of time. And just something very simple, such as the contract around who's going to administer. Our committee took a lot of testimony on the contracts that we're going to be putting out and the IT system that is going to be used. And this is not a simple matter. This is very complicated, and you can't just go buy this system off the shelf because nobody's ever done it before, so nobody knows what to do. So we're creating this. So there are all kinds of things that have to be looked at, and we took a lot of testimony in our committee around the administration of the system itself and around the IT used. And one of the things that I think that was in that bill was some hard deadlines in terms of dates. And what we heard is that when you're contracting for something like this, there's three parts. There's the cost, there's the scope, and there's the timeline. If you have a hard deadline or a hard line on any one of those three, it's going to pop out someplace else. So is it better to be a little more flexible? Instead of saying we're going to have this in place January 1st, 2017, can we have it in place May of 2017? Thus allowing more flexibility in terms of the cost and the scope of what the contractors have to do. And so it is very complicated, but I think it's where we have to go. We're paying for the health. We're paying for healthcare now.
Right.
We're just going to be paying for it in a different manner.
Right.
I don't think we're going to be paying any more. Some people will be paying more. Some people will be paying less. But we are paying for it now, and it's continuing to go up. So I think that the committee that was set up with the chairs of the House and Senate Appropriations, Health and Welfare, and Finance committees, I think is a brilliant idea as an oversight
Yeah.
to make sure over the summer that things are progressing the way they need to be progressing.
Yep.
So I think we're going full force, and I don't think anybody has gotten cold feet.
Yep.
No.
I think the rollout of Green Mountain Healthcare has actually gone pretty well. The website has had some problems, but the policies that we hope to get more people signed up, it's working. We have more people that have health care now that can afford it as part of the affordable health care, and I think the reality is taking the next step toward single payer will be the way we're going to continue to control costs and increase access, and then eventually better outcomes for everybody. Just to mention a few things we did in human services this year, because it dovetailed a little bit with what you were doing in Senate Judiciary. But while we're reforming the healthcare system, we continue to reform the mental health system. We've been working on a number of things to help make the mental health care system more localized, decentralizing from not having a large state psychiatric hospital anymore to a smaller hospital and more satellite systems so people can have treatment closer to home. There were some policies that we enacted this year, and one of them had to do with the process for expediting the judicial review of when somebody can be forced to have medication. Now, in the 8 years I've been in the legislature, that one issue has carried over from every year to year. There's
12
other
years.
I-
I know,
Yeah.
it's been there since I've been there too, yeah.
There are other issues that come and go, but I continue to hear from families who have a member of the family who cycles through being on their meds, doing fine, being on their meds, and all of a sudden they get off their meds, and then there's the call from the hospital, a call from the police. Right here at the retreat, we've heard stories of situations where people were either harmful to themselves or to others, and I think that's where we were coming from. Not necessarily to start medicating everybody we could, but the reality is we had a process that was very kludgy and old, and we tried to streamline it, and that's where, again, the Judiciary Committees in concert with the Health and Welfare and Human Services. Now, your committee took a lot of testimony on that, or the
did,
Judiciary Committee.
We did, and I reported the bill, and I have never been as nervous reporting a bill on the floor as I was that one. And because it's such an emotional issue.
Yeah.
And people feel very strongly about it. And I think that we ended up with something that recognizes and honors the rights of both people who do not want to be medicated and people who, if they felt that they had a choice, would say yes, but now I'm saying no because I'm not making wise decisions for myself. I think the bill that we did addressed both of those, and all this does is it again doesn't say whether medication is good, bad, when
Right.
it should be used, when it shouldn't be used, but it says there has to be a more timely review by the judiciary of when it's appropriate and when it's appropriate to expedite it. And it's only appropriate to expedite it in terms of if somebody is going to cause serious bodily injury to someone, or if they've cycled through the system in the past 2 years and have been positively affected by having medication. And one of the things that it did is when it started, it didn't start until that judicial review didn't start until you were actually admitted to, and that would have been the retreat or Berlin or Rutland, and it ended up that when somebody goes to the emergency room of the hospital, the clock starts ticking right then. So, because we have people sitting in emergency rooms in
Right.
hospitals for 7, 10, 14 days,
Yeah.
not having any, they're in the emergency room of the hospital. So now the judiciary can review that within, there has to be a second review within 24 hours and then a judicial review within 72 hours, and can say, look, this person shouldn't even be here. Send this person home.
Yeah.
They're okay. Just, so I think that, we'll see how it works out in
Yeah.
practice, but I think that we struck a good balance, and I know that there are people who think we didn't go far enough, and there are people who think we went too far, which makes me think we probably got it pretty right.
A good compromise
Yeah,
then.
but it's a very emotional issue, and unfortunately, the bill got tagged with the title involuntary medication, and it was not about involuntary medication. It was about timely access to judicial review.
Yeah.
That's what it was about. But no matter how many times you said that, the bill was still called the involuntary medication bill.
Yeah.
So,
In the few minutes we have remaining now, looking ahead, I know David and I have talked and have worked to put ourselves on the ballot for next year, so we're looking to do some more work. We have more work to do. I'm assuming you're in the same situation.
I've
So,
got my ballots here. My petitions here. No, I have no
David,
ballots.
what's the unfinished business or the new business that you're hoping that we can accomplish in the next biennium?
Well, I think I mentioned right off that we did not successfully complete work on river protection, and that is going to be my main focus. It's the main focus of my committee, but as everybody probably knows, I am the river steward for the Connecticut River, working with the Connecticut River Watershed Council. And, I'm a river guy, and so it's not only the focus of my committee, but I'm going to enjoy working on this bill, and hopefully with the administration behind the bill. There was some resistance this year. They thought it was premature. I'm not entirely sure that they were right, but I had to take them at their word since the bill, in fact, took so long to get finished. The other thing is we had a dam safety bill that, again, did not get over to the Senate until late in the session. Senate had some questions that they could not answer in a timely way, and we'll go back to that. One of the other roles that I have that you're aware of is that I am the ranking member on the House Rules Committee. And the Speaker, in response to some public criticism of the House and the lack of a real procedure in terms of the ethics of House members, put together a study committee that I served on as the representative from the Rules Committee. Tom Koch, Representative Tom Koch from Barrytown, who is retiring this year, he and I were the representatives on that working committee from the Rules Committee. And we passed out, and the House adopted a change to the House rules that will set in place an ethics committee. It'll be appointed at the beginning of each biennium, exactly the way that our sexual harassment committee is appointed, so that if people, whether they are members of the body or outside of the House, have a concern about a member, there is a forum to be able to address that. The same with sexual harassment. If anybody outside the body or inside the body has a problem, there is a forum, and that needs to be fleshed out now. It will exist. It will be appointed by whoever is Speaker beginning of the next biennium, but internal procedures for the workings of that committee have yet to be worked out, and I hope to be part of that process also for next year.
Yeah. I think one of the difficulties is we're a part-time citizen legislature, so it's not as cut and dried sometimes when people suggest that David Deen might have a vested interest in seeing the river cleaned up, while it's in everybody's interest, and it's not like you're making yourself a millionaire doing that.
Right.
But questions come up, and I think it's important that we do have a
Yeah, right now, the
forum
only
now.
tool that is available to a member of the House, the rules of procedure for the House are numbered, and Rule 75 allows a member not to vote on an issue that the member feels they have a conflict of interest. And it's self-enforcing, and in this day and age, with the skepticism about elected officials, the House does not have a problem, in my experience. I mean, I know what goes on in the House pretty well. And we do not have a problem, but the appearance and the comfort level in terms of the public, in terms of our activities, is important. And so we took this step. The speakers provided the leadership to put this together.
Well, thank you for your work on that one too. So Jeanette, what are you hoping, or that you didn't get done this year, or that new items you'd like to bring into the legislature next year?
Well, a couple, but I just want to echo what David said about the Ethics Committee, and we took a lot of testimony on it. We actually, we're going to have a bill that would have set up an external ethics committee, but that's not constitutional.
Right.
We found out that the legislature determines the qualifications of its members, period. And
And that's
so-
because of the Vermont Constitution.
right, the Vermont Constitution.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of looking at other states, but their constitution doesn't say that, so they can have an external ethics committee. So we did have a suggestion. It did not, our committee did. We did this in government operations as opposed to a other separate committee. And we have a recommendation. We did not bring it to the Rules Committee this year because the Rules Committee was so stretched at the end of the session by looking at all the bills that were coming over from the House, and they were meeting a lot trying to figure out what they were going to do with those bills. So we didn't bring it to them, but we will bring it to them at the beginning of the next session and see what they say. We're also going to, we did not get to public records this year, and we'll do that next year. We did pass a bill this year that looked at certification of law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
And so we want to follow up on that with what the scope of practice will be. We're getting rid of part-time and full-time certifications, and rather having scope of practice so that you could be a level 2 certified officer and work 4 hours a week or 45 hours a week, but your training is at a level 2. Rather than having part-time and full-time. So we're going to look at all of those, and then our committee will be looking at a lot of healthcare issues around the administration of the healthcare system, and not the benefits package or anything else, but the administration of it and how it affects public employees. And we're hoping to have some input. We had people lined up at the end of the session, but it just got too crazy and we had to keep canceling it. But we're going to have input from the Vermont State Employees Association, NEA, the UVM, the Vermont State College System, VSAC, all the kind of public and quasi-public employees, and see what happens with them. So our committee will be doing those. In judiciary, I'm not sure what we'll be doing, but I'm sure it'll be pretty exciting if I'm on there again. It's an exciting committee to be on, and it's I'm learning a lot because it's something that I didn't know about. Did you know, for example, that shooting a swimming deer is a felony?
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
It is a felony.
I didn't know until
And-
David shared that it was not illegal
To dump on the
to litter in the river, right?
Right.
Until
And-
now.
And,
Yeah.
and the
Beginning July 1, it will be
It will
illegal.
be.
Yeah.
And the collateral consequences for committing a felony are pretty hefty.
Yeah.
I mean, you may not be able to be a barber and in some states you lose your ability to vote. In Florida you do. But so we're looking more at the collateral consequences and what that means and what are felonies and should they really be felonies. So
Yeah, and I have heard in discussion that here in Vermont, even a misdemeanor charge can lose you the right to vote.
no, not right,
Not,
vote. Jury duty.
But jury duty
Jury duty.
and weapons
And weapons and being a
Just-
barber and being
yeah,
a,
and misdemeanors are like throwing trash in a river.
right. Or if you bang into my car and hurt the bumper, smash the bumper of my car, it would be a misdemeanor. But if you smashed into Bobby Starr's car, he's got a Jaguar, it would be a felony because
The value of the
value,
vehicle, yeah.
yeah. So we need to look at all of that, our classifications.
Yeah.
And I don't know, hopefully I'll be in the Senate, and hopefully I'll be chairing government operations again, and I would love to be on judiciary again, but, you know, they have 30 people they have to sign, and
Well, you got my vote. So there's one for you.
we're one.
All right.
I think
Well-
my husband said he'd vote for me too.
Well, there's two. Well, there's a lot of big issues I think we have to look at again next year. I continue to think global climate change is something that is real. Humans have a connection to it. We're seeing the ramifications of it by the storms we're having. We had a winter this year. That's one to remember.
Yeah.
As I'm telling people now, I'm speechless that I'll be peachless this year because my peach tree and other people I've talked to are not seeing peach plumes. It's a small thing, but it's a change because I've had several years now. Peaches have been growing here. On the bigger scale, we did something about net metering to increase that, and I think our energy policy, we would do well to keep raising awareness and helping the practice of it in terms of energy efficiency, conservation, alternative energies. Transportation's a big issue that is connected to that.
It's the largest source of carbon
Yeah.
in the state. It's the largest carbon footprint. It comes from our transportation sector, which is another change we made in the Rules Committee. We changed the House rules and made our Transportation Committee specifically responsible for carbon impacts of the transportation sector. So their scope of responsibility has been expanded to take on those issues.
And locally, Molly Burke's doing great work on that committee, and certainly moving ahead on things like that, more public transportation.
Try education.
Education,
And education
I know
financing.
financing. I know a lot of towns like Putney, Westminster, Dummerston had that experience this year, that the formula really didn't work. Their budget spending was kept low or very low increases, but tax increases were not commensurate to that, and I think we need to take a good hard look at the funding formula right now. Things have changed, things evolve, and I think we need to evolve with them and take a good look at that. On the human services side of things, you know, I got into this because I've been working in human services for years. I'm very concerned about how we take care of those who can't take care of themselves, the elderly, the disabled, children. One of the things we heard about this year were a number of aging parents with disabled children who are wondering, so what happens when I can't take care of them anymore?
Yep.
This is a big issue. We did some good things around universal pre-K this year. We helped, I think, child care workers by giving them the right to organize, but if we're going to continue to try and get better outcomes going forward, when kids are in school, they need to be ready to school, and that's where good early preschool and early ed happens, and I hope we can do more around that. And of course, healthcare is going to be an ongoing thing. It's something that we are leading the nation on, I believe, and hope to be doing some more on that. I hope to be able to be doing more with BCTV too. I want to thank everybody here at BCTV for again helping us during the session when we broadcast our webcasts from our little iPad, and for the help they do in the studio, bringing our work in Montpelier closer to the people here. So thanks a lot to everybody at BCTV.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
And I look forward to another year next year, and as they say, God willing, and the dam don't break, we'll be here again
Right.
next year.
And thank you
I
for
hope.
putting this together.
Thank you.
Because I know others, besides Jeanette and myself, participate, and I think it's really important for people to see their representatives up close and personal.
It's important for us to be able to bring our work.
Well, thank you for doing it.
Yep. Well, that's our wrap-up for the 2014 session. We'll be starting to prepare, and after the election, we'll be getting ready for the 2015 session, hopefully, and look forward to spending some more time with you.
And remember to vote.
That's right.
Yep. Get out and vote.
Thanks a lot, and have a good summer.